And why leave the Navy?
So again, my wife is currently working in Singapore. If I were
When did you guys meet?
we met while I was at the academy. She was studying in Maryland, and I was
okay.
studying at Annapolis, and we just happened to meet each other,
Right,
and
right.
I went from there.
And sort of lasted all those years of you in service.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And so there wasn't an option of you moving to Singapore with the Navy. It was like, okay, time's up.
That's
Gotta
correct,
just move
yeah.
over and start things anew. Okay, how long have you been in town?
So I've been in Singapore since the beginning of the year, so January of 23.
Okay, and why IvyPrep? Why math? Well, obviously you're science and math
Yeah.
type of guy, but
So I really like teaching people. I've had lots of opportunities to teach my sailors throughout the years, usually on the oceanography side, a little bit of boat driving here and there. So more like technical, I guess, hands-on training, but still a little bit of classwork here and there, especially with like the oceanography segments. So like physics of underwater sound, how sound travels underwater, how different factors affect it. So I am a little bit used to teaching the science part of things. And yeah, again, I like helping people, I like teaching. So when I came to IvyPrep, I figured math was probably the best bet for me.
And speaking of the SAT, I mean, the SAT has obviously undergone a major overhaul this year, internationally, right? I don't think things have switched just yet in the US.
I think there's an option to do both.
In the States?
I think so.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
I haven't taken the SAT in recent years, so I'm not 100% sure.
Right, but I mean, so international students, everyone has to take the digital test now, right? Certainly students in Singapore. What do you think that means for students? What is the impact that it has or I guess what is the on-the-ground sentiment from the individuals that you've been interacting with and tutoring?
So I think the importance of the SAT for them is mainly geared towards American colleges. So it's a way of standardizing, different types of education styles across the world. So schools in Singapore, schools in Australia, China, Indonesia, Malaysia, they're all very different from each other, as well as from US schools. Even in the US, I think state to state, they differ quite a lot. So the SAT is a good way to gauge how you compare to the rest of the applicants. So again, it is a standardized test. It's a way to put things on the same playing field, if that makes sense.
Okay, so you feel as though the SAT acts as an equalizer of sorts. So it gives admissions officers an objective measure of a student's academic potential?
Yeah, I would say so.
And what do you think of the fact that, in recent years, a lot of I guess during COVID, a lot of universities went test optional, and some, like the University of California schools, have gone test blind. I think a common question that both of us, as well as several members of our team, get from students and parents is, especially if they feel like they're overloaded with work, they say, is the SAT even relevant? Or can I just get through with my A-levels or IB scores or whatever it is? What do you feel about, how would you answer that question? Because I'm sure it's something that a lot of listeners have.
So for the college admissions process, again, I'm not 100% sure how it works.
Nobody does, right?
So unfortunately, I have also not worked as a college admissions counselor. But for them, I don't know if they're familiar with different types of education systems throughout the world. I don't know if they're familiar with the O-levels and A-level scale that Singapore uses, whereas I do know they are for sure familiar with the SAT and the ACT. For other countries, again, I'm not familiar with the education systems there, and I wouldn't know for a fact that like you said, for example, University of California system is also familiar with those systems. So I think for international applicants, the SAT and ACT still would be relevant, more so than, say, localized school scores, unless they have some sort of like exchange program with a college or with a local school in the US, that might be worth something. But if they don't, then I think the SAT and ACT would be a better standardized measure.
Got it. And how do you feel about the digital ACT? Do you think it's a little easier for students? Does it make things any different?
I think one of the big differences is the testing environment, as well as the fact that they're now allowed to use calculators on both sections. Kind of difficult to stop someone from using that on a digital test, right? So I think those are the two biggest changes. But other than that, I don't foresee too much of a difference between them.
Before we continue, I would like to take a quick break to remind you to subscribe to our podcast and leave us a review on your favorite platform. Your feedback helps us improve and to reach a wider audience to provide further insight into this arduous journey. Also, if you have any questions or suggestions for future episodes, feel free to email us at our email linked in the description below. We'd love to hear from you. Yeah, well, I guess the biggest overhaul was, at least the biggest content overhaul was in English, right? Or not even content, the way that the questions are asked with the reading comprehension section. I think when we spoke to Faith, she had quite a bit to say about that. As a SAT tutor now, specifically in math, how does that weigh up to when you were an oceanographer and training juniors? Because of course, I guess at that level, it's you've done something for about 5 or 6 years and you're training professionals that are following in your footsteps versus now you're tutoring school children, essentially. What is the differences in sort of those experiences?
So they're definitely quite different jobs, right? So working in the field, actually driving boats, being, I guess, not in a super dangerous situation, but a situation that could potentially become dangerous, is definitely a lot different than being in a classroom teaching school students. As far as some similarities go, I still teach very technical concepts. So a lot of math in theory, and a lot of our questions kind of apply those to real world situations. Whereas when I was teaching my sailors in the Navy, it was a very similar process when I was doing classroom sessions. Typically me standing up at a whiteboard, drawing things out, explaining to them taking the information in, taking notes, asking questions. So I feel like in that aspect, it's very similar. For the differences, obviously being in the Navy, the stakes are a little bit higher. Here, teaching SAT math, like I mentioned before, quite safe. Whereas if you're in an overseas environment doing, say, on-the-job training for how to drive boats in the middle of the open ocean, a little bit of a different learning environment, a little bit more pressure in that one. So I feel like in that way they are quite different. And not to mention, I wasn't teaching full-time. I was doing that kind of
on the side,
in addition to my other duties.
Okay. And do you feel as though the skills that you've learned, maybe as an oceanographer, are in any way transferable to younger students?
Definitely.
Okay.
Whether that's, just having job experience to begin with, I think any type of experience would be relevant. But again, training others, I think that was a direct skill that I could use and apply to this job.
And do you have any students that I guess have been interested in your own pathway or are at all interested in being an oceanographer or anything like that? Because it's not too common, right? Even though it's pretty cool.
Oh, thank you.
Well, I think so.
I haven't had any students interested in oceanography just yet. But I do have students, so a lot of the male students in Singapore who are serving NS, they ask me a lot of questions about my Navy life.
Right.
So not so much about oceanography, but more the military, US military and Navy aspect of my job.
And is that curiosity, or are they asking for some sort of moral support from someone who's been through 4 years in the Naval Academy?
I think for them, it's nice to have somebody who knows what it's like to be in the military. Whereas, not everybody here does NS. So in that way, I think they can appreciate that experience. And I do think a lot of it does come from genuine curiosity. From one military to another, I do think they are quite different experiences. I've never done Singapore NS, so I can't speak as to what it is. But I can give my perspective from being in the US military, and I think they do appreciate that.
So you've been with IvyPrep for quite some time now, teaching the SAT. Well, I guess you and I know, but for all the listeners, what do we do that is particularly helpful to students? Are there any initiatives that you've been involved in lately that deal with the SAT?
Yes. So again, obviously I'm the math teacher over here and I teach SAT math. But aside from what we normally do, which is typically either group classes or private tuition, we've also been working on a short video segment that you should be seeing sometime soon, hopefully.
Okay.
Where we kind of break down the more common questions that students ask. So we'll be putting them out there for future reference. We also have quite a huge selection of practice problems. And one of the best ways to learn, especially for SAT math, is just repetition, repetition, repetition. Doing different types of problems over and over again, so you get used to the way that the SAT questions are making you think, and you get used to the way they are asking the question, which can be quite confusing, especially when they have a very long, wordy math question. They like to throw extra information in there, so I think knowing how to filter that out and knowing how to take what you have and get to the answer that you need is a good skill that we teach.
And what comes next for you? Well, now you're in Singapore. Obviously, family is here at this point. What is in your future? Can you see your future at all? Have you had your palms read?
I have not had my palms read, but I hear there's quite a couple of different opportunities for that over here.
Yeah, tons.
Yeah, I'll stick with IvyPrep. I really enjoy my job. I like teaching people. And again, it's significantly less stressful than teaching people on the water. So that's not too bad. I think for the far future, I'm open to doing anything really. Looking at back into the maritime sector, I'll be doing a master's degree at some point in the future.
Okay.
And then
what would that be?
A master's of science in maritime technology.
Okay. So you're very much staying in the maritime sector or industry rather. Okay. And is there anything else we haven't spoken about today or anything that you felt as though you wanted to touch on? Any tips that you think you want to leave students with or anybody watching this with really?
I would say keep an open mind. You never really know where you're going to end up. I thought I would be doing the U.S. Navy full career, 20 years. And, now I'm here teaching math in Singapore. A couple of years ago, that never really crossed my mind as to what I'd be doing. So definitely don't close doors. And, just be open-minded, ready for whatever.
Okay. Well, in that case, thank you so much, Jacob, for your time. And thank you, students and parents, for dialing in for this episode. We'll see you next time. That's all for today's episode of Dear Applicants. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope that you found the content valuable and insightful. If you'd like to learn more about our guests or the topics we discussed, be sure to check out our show notes for links and further resources.